Oh my god, there's an armadillo right there.
Oh, excellent.
An armadillo, a native bee.
And it's gone again.
Yeah, they're very, very fast.
I'm really excited to be bringing this video to you today because I have a special guest. Dr. Kit Prendergast is a native bee scientist. She has published a number of papers, authored books, spends time educating people about native bees, and even has a range of clothing available featuring her wonderful artwork of bees. Australian native bees are a very important aspect to our Australian bush, and I'm very pleased that Dr. Kit has agreed to answer a bunch of questions that I have about native bees on what will be the first of many interviews on my channel, Life in the Bush. Dr. Kit, thank you for coming. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. Always happy to talk about bees.
Yes, I've noticed that. And I love your earrings as well, and your necklace. You are all bead up today.
All bee themed, yes.
Yeah, excellent. Before we jump into the interview, I just want to mention where we're filming today. We're in Bunbury in the southwest of Western Australia. We're standing on Wadandi Noongar land. So the Wadandi Noongar people are the first Australians of this region who've cared for this country for tens of thousands of years, and Bunbury now sits on Wadandi Noongar land. So, Dr. Kit, I know you like being called doctor.
Yes. That's why I got the PhD, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm curious to know how many years it took to get your PhD, like to get that title, and what sparked an interest in studying native bees in the first place.
So my PhD was from midway 2016 to 2020 was when I finished, but then the whole ceremony thing was 2021. So the PhD was 4 years, but really like the journey was a lot longer, because to even get to a PhD, I had to have the basic fundamentals of ecology, ecological principles, interspecies competition, foraging ecology. So I actually didn't study bees at all before I started my PhD.
Okay.
But many of the core like fundamental theories and principles, and just how to make observations rather than just look at things, how to develop questions, how to like think of problems and ways to solve them, what sort of analyses to even perform. So all that, like that background, most of that was through my undergrad. So I did zoology and conservation biology as my majors.
Yep.
And also I did an arts degree, and I think that helps like the creativity side of things, and all that like other extra things that I bring to my like persona as a bee scientist. So yeah, PhD took 4 years of my life, but there was many things leading up to it. Yeah. But what sparked my interest in bees was actually, I was thinking of, I always wanted to do a PhD, because I was like, it'd be cool to have doctor in front of my name, and like
that's good motivation.
Yeah. But just also the fact that the PhD is probably like one of the only times in your life where you'll get to devise a research project that's yours, that you can own it. You design it yourself. Well, actually, lots of people don't do that. There's a project that a supervisor designs, and then you do the work. But I decided to do things a bit differently and create a research project that I was really passionate about. So I had all these ideas, but then I went to a little talk by the WA Naturals Club.
Yep.
He was like showing some photos of the native bees, and I was like, wow, these are really cool. I didn't realize there were so many.
Yeah.
Then I just started like reading all about them, reading everything I could, talking to Dr. Terry Houston from the WA Museum, who's like the bee guru. I just like, I don't know, call it the bee bug, and then I just like was thinking about like, there's been lots of research on bees in agricultural areas, but I'm very much an advocate of protecting biodiversity for biodiversity rather than like what it can do to pollinate crops or what it can do for us. It's been like hammered into me for a good cause that we are in a biodiversity hotspot here in the southwest. We have a chance here to change how residential development is happening. Let's do it so that we can protect the bees. So that's where that all came from. And I knew about honeybees, and then I was like, oh, it's an introduced species. Maybe it's having negative impacts on native bees. Hasn't really been studied in urban areas, so that's how it all came.
Yeah. Okay. If you're wondering what a biodiversity hotspot is, I will do a video on that soon. So keep watching the channel. So, and you mentioned the honeybee as well. Most people, when we mention the word bee, picture a honeybee in their head, and a lot of people don't realise that that's an introduced species to Australia, but we do have huge amounts of native bees in Australia. So, Kit, how many native Australian bees do we have, and how long have they been around? Like, when did they evolve?
So we have about 2,000 species. We have over 1,600 named species. So these are species that someone has collected, recognised as a distinct species, written up a description, say how it's different from the other species. But there are so many species that haven't had that happen. There's probably 1,000 more species that haven't been described. They're in museum drawers. Like so many species that I collect, they're not described species. And there's also a lot that we don't know. And there's probably still that haven't even been collected. So lots. And there's over 20,000 species in the whole entire world.
Wow.
Yeah. So bees, they're essentially vegetarian wasps. They evolved from a lineage of wasps back in the Cretaceous during the time of the non-avian dinosaurs. They evolved at a key point in history. It was not long before bees evolved that angiosperms, which are flowering plants, they evolved. So it's believed that bees, being really important pollinators, they help drive the radiation and diversification of the angiosperms as well.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, that as the flowering plants evolved, so did bees, and they came from a lineage, as you said, of wasps that became those sort of vegetarian wasps. I love that. I didn't know that until I learnt that from you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's believed that the first bee evolved from a wasp that these were predatory wasps. They'd go to the flowers to predate on their insect prey and incidentally collect pollen, and when they put the insect in the nest with the pollen, eventually the babies would eat the pollen, and then they adapted to it. And it's just fascinating. But like, imagine if that never happened, and then we wouldn't have bees, or if bees didn't evolve, we'd still have like pollinators, but maybe there wouldn't be as many flowering plant species around today because they didn't have that diversification and coevolution. So it's just fascinating.
So our native bees are quite different to the honeybee. Can you give us an overview of the different features of our native bees?
Yeah, so honeybees, they have this advanced form of sociality called eusociality, where you've got the queen. She lays all the eggs. Her daughters are the workers, so they care for the brood, they forage, they defend the hive, and then the drones are the male honeybees. So when the drones mate with the queen, and they only mate with the queen once, their penis, which I call a penis, blows off. Yeah, I coined that. I'm very proud of that. I want to go down in history for that.
Okay, all right, you heard it first. Kit. Dr. Kit came up with that word, penis, a bee's penis.
Yeah.
And it blows off.
Yes.
And then they die.
And then they die because losing body parts isn't great.
No. Wow. So that's the honeybee.
That's the honeybee. With native bees, completely different. So most of them are solitary. So they don't have, they don't live in colonies. They like socially distancing. Naturally. So each female is both a queen and a worker and a nurse, so she has to do all the work herself. And the males, they don't die after they mate. So I think it's a much better lifestyle. A lot of work for the females, but the thing is that most of them, they don't care for their babies either. So with the honeybees, the queen lays the eggs in the comb, and then the nurses feed the baby bees. Whereas the native bees, the females, they collect nectar and pollen, put it in the nest. They don't build combs. They don't go back and feed or care for the baby. The baby survives on the nectar and pollen. We do have some bees that are semi-social, so they live in small colonies, but they don't have that, again, honeycomb structure. The only eusocial bees we have are the Meliponini, and we've got 11 species of them. They live up north, down the east coast, so none in this region of Australia in the southwest.
Yep.
They do have the queen and that hive structure and the eusocial structure. Whilst they build hives, they don't build the hexagons. The comb structure differs between the species, but the main one, Tetragonella carbonaria, has a spiral comb, which is quite cool. So whilst most native bees sting, when they do sting you, it's nowhere near as painful as a honeybee sting, talking from experience. We also have Australian native bees that don't sting. Those are those eusocial Meliponini, so they don't have a sting at all. Also, the only bees that sting are the females, so you can't be stung by a male bee. But yeah, if you're going to be stung by a bee, it's much better to be stung by a native bee. It's also better for a bee's point of view. With the honeybees, when they sting, their stinger actually gets lodged in your skin, so the bee dies because part of its body is lost. With the native bees, that doesn't happen either, so their sting just stings you and then they can live on and sting again. You have no concerns about being stung by a native bee if you're anaphylactic. Like, still be careful, you don't want to be stung by a bee, but there's never been any deaths from being stung by a native bee.
And you recently published a paper, excuse me while I read it off my prompt card because it's got a long title, so I wrote it down to get it right. Urban native vegetation remnants support more diverse native bee communities than residential gardens in Australia's southwest biodiversity hotspot. What were the main findings of that paper?
Yeah, so that was a core part of my PhD thesis. I was looking at bushland remnants, so patches of bushland that remain within the urban regions, and comparing them with residential gardens to see how many native bees there were, how many species, the composition, and what features of the urbanized landscape helped or harmed native bee assemblages. A key finding was that we really need to protect our bushland remnants. Yep. Residential gardens cannot replace bushland. There are many things that you can do to make your garden better for native bees, but it can't replace a thriving bushland ecosystem. I also found that planting lots and lots of different species of flowers is actually bad for our native bees. And that goes against, I guess, like common sense. Like, you think lots of different flowers is good for the native bees, but you have to think within like a particular area, lots of our native bees are quite specialized. So if you have lots and lots of different flowers, those specialized ones, there's not going to be many flowers of the plants that they need. So it's better to plant like big patches of the best flowers for the native bees and have a high proportion of native flowers as opposed to exotic flowers.
I spend a lot of time out in the bush filming and photographing for videos, and often when I'm filming a flower, I incidentally get footage of a honeybee visiting that flower. Now, it's not necessarily a good thing for the biodiversity of our bushland to be seeing honeybees so readily. Can you explain some of the impacts of the introduced honeybee on our bushland biodiversity and our native bees?
Yeah, so that was also a core part of my research, looking at the impact of honeybees on our native bees. And it's quite a complex topic because sometimes they won't have negative impacts, and sometimes they do though, and it will vary according to the resource levels in the environment. Honeybees are generalists, so they do quite well in those like mixed flower gardens with lots of exotic plants, but they can outcompete the native bees. And when there's not many flowers around, the honeybees can take more nectar and pollen resources than is available to support the populations of the native bees, and so then they don't have enough to eat, and then their populations can decline. So yeah, they aren't benign, and they're definitely not sort of like saviors of biodiversity, which is how they're sometimes marketed in the media. They're an invasive species, and they're basically livestock as well. People keep them and manage them. So we have to think of them like that. They're important for agriculture. They're important for producing honey, because most of our native bees don't produce honey. None of them here in this part of Australia, but they're not like wildlife. And when they are in the bush, then they're feral animals.
I don't think I've ever, when I think of the word livestock, I think cattle, the larger mammals, not a bee. And I heard once that apparently the honeybees even get up earlier and stay up later, and therefore that allows them to take more nectar from the native bees.
So they do tend to get up earlier and stay awake later, they have massive colonies, so they need to be collecting lots of nectar. And also they're quite big compared with many of our native bees, so when it's cooler, they're able to forage earlier. The native bees need to wait for it to get a little bit warmer for them to start foraging. Same with when the sun goes down. Oh my God, there's an amygdala right there.
Oh, excellent. Oh.
An amygdala, a native bee.
And it's gone again.
Yeah, they're very, very fast. But
hard to catch on camera. Hopefully we can zoom in on that one later.
that was exciting.
Yeah, cool.
Just bear with us because you might notice that we keep changing position. We're actually filming outdoors, and so we have to follow the sun. So Kit and I have just moved to a new location because we'd prefer to be in the shade. It's in the mid-30s at the moment. So I wanted to show you all this book, Creating a Haven for Native Bees. Now, I mentioned that Kit has written some books. This is one of them. I was stoked when I saw this because it's a really valuable resource, worth getting. It talks about the native bee lifestyle and behaviour. It talks about a range of different native bee species. It just goes into a little bit of information there, and there's loads of photos, so that helps beginners with identification of bees. It talks about ways that we can help native bees, one of the main one being, or one of the ways is to build a bee hotel. Now, some bee hotels on the market are not necessarily designed to suit the nesting needs of our native bees. So Kit, can you just tell us a little bit about what the native bees need in a bee hotel? And we'll put the link in the description for how you can purchase this book if you're interested in making one for your own garden.
Yeah, so bee hotels are basically artificial nesting structures for the cavity nesting bees. So these are some of the solitary bees, mainly the megachili and the Hylaean bees. And so in nature, they nest in trees in tiny little holes created by wood-boring beetles. And so we're replicating that. And you can make them with bamboo or with wood and drilling holes in them. And it's that simple. And my recommendation is to make it simpler rather than fancier. The key things are the length and the diameter. So the length needs to be ideally 10 centimeters or more. If it's shorter, the females won't lay as many eggs along the length, so they lay a number of eggs along the nest, and if it's shorter, they won't be able to lay as many. It can also skew the sex ratio, and it can make it easier for parasitoids to destroy the entire nest. Also, the diameter of the holes, this is really important. So our native bees are very tiny. Some of them are just 3 millimeters long.
Yeah, wow.
So I say the hole diameter is to be between 2 millimeters and 10 millimeters max. So bigger than that, you will get wasps and spiders instead of native bees.
Okay, yeah, so it's probably best to make your own. And I've seen one at Yanchep National Park that was just an old railway sleeper in the bush, and they drilled holes in it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the sex ratio. Did you say that they lay the female eggs first and then the male?
Yeah, usually they do. With lots of native bees they do, and this is because females are like more important, and so also they tend to be bigger. So when the females first emerge, they go and forage for food, they mate, and in all Hymenoptera, so this is bees, ants, sawflies and wasps, females are produced from fertilized eggs, males are produced from unfertilized eggs. So females will mate, she'll lay females by fertilizing her eggs, and then as the season starts to end, or her lifespan starts to end, there's not as many flowers, she will then lay the males after.
Okay, wow.
And it's also so the males will then emerge first, so they're all ready to mate with the females when the females come out.
So much information that I just didn't know about. Yeah, awesome. Now, this also does talk about other ways we can help our native bees. So aside from building a bee hotel and making sure we retain native bushland and manage native bushland well to manage that biodiversity, keep it intact, what else can we do to assist native bees?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that we all can do. One of them is making sure that we plant good flowers for the native bees, not ones that favour the honeybees. So native plants, like the best ones are the things like those ones. Callistemon, Scaevola, Dianella, Eucalypts. Eucalypts attract so many native bees, and I know not everyone lives maybe in a property that can have a eucalypt if you live in an apartment or something, or a small backyard, but they are just so good. So if you have a eucalypt in your local park, on your verge, like, please don't cut it down because they're so good.
Yeah.
Like, I can collect like 30 species from one eucalypt. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. I just did a survey like a couple days ago, and there was a Mary in flower, and there was like nothing else in flower, and I still managed to collect, I think, 40 bees from it, about 12 species.
Wow.
So just from one tree.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good.
Yeah, more important than we really think.
Yeah.
Not only beautiful and provide shade and drop temperatures in urban areas, but provide, habitat, food sources, everything for our native species, including bees.
Yeah, and the trees, like the big trees, they do provide the habitat with the nesting resources. So those old trees or woody trees, the little holes in them, really good. You can also provide habitat for the ground nesting bees. So some of our bees nest in the ground, so don't put pavings over everything or mulch everything. I know mulching is important, but like not everywhere. So leaves and patches of bare soil for those ground nesting bees. Two biggest threats to native bees we can both address every day through what we eat. So climate change, as I'm sure everyone knows, is a big threat to biodiversity, to human livelihoods, welfare. And it's a big threat to bees because it's altering the flowering resources, it's causing drought, fires, rising temperatures. And then another big threat is, of course, land clearing. And, the major cause of land clearing is still agriculture, and a lot of that is either for livestock pastures or to produce food for the livestock. So a really simple action that we can do is just change our diet, reduce your meat intake, ideally eliminate eating meat, and you can cut your carbon footprint by 50%.
Wow.
And that's something that you don't even have to have a garden to do. I actually published an article on that, like how we can address biodiversity decline through changing our diet. So,
excellent. All right, and we'll put a link at the end for how to access any of Kit's papers and articles if you're interested as well. I'm really grateful for scientific researchers who do all this work, like yourself, and then share your knowledge with us so that we can use that knowledge to adapt our lifestyle, planting more plants and potentially changing diets. And I'm grateful for you joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. This is the last question, with all the knowledge you have of native bees so far, what do you find to be the most interesting fact about native bees?
Oh my goodness. there's so much to discover about native bees, and I think that's why they're so exciting to study, because you can just answer so many ecological questions. Almost every day I'll have like an idea. I'll be like, oh, that'd be cool to study, or I can address that question. I'll be looking at my data and I'll be like, I could also analyze this with my data. And I think also I love that they sort of tie into evolution, mate selection, foraging ecology, biodiversity protection, network theory, and also there's just so many of them, like so many species, and sometimes that can be, as someone that's studying them, and when there's like so many species still to be described, it can be even like quite overwhelming. We still don't even know how many there are. But it's also exciting because there's just still so much to discover, and it's almost like when you're going out to do bee surveys, you never know what you're going to find. It's like I like being a Pokemon catcher. It's like, oh, I wonder what I'll find and discover. And native bees, like we're just filming. We weren't even looking for native bees, and one just flew past. So they're everywhere, and they're so like cute and diverse.
Yep.
So yeah, I just think they're really, really interesting. Like in terms of one interesting thing about them, it's so hard to even say. I guess like the best thing is that how much you can discover about them, and everyday people as well. Like I published a couple of papers because of citizen scientists on my Bees in the Burbs Facebook group, posting a photo, and I'll be like, that's a new observation, that's never been seen before. Or they'll get in contact with me and they'll be like, oh, I've got these bees nesting in polystyrene in my house. And I'll be like, that's never been seen before.
Yeah.
So
wow.
yeah, everyone can make new discoveries.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I love that you say you can get out of your house and go down to your local park or your own backyard and just spend time in nature, and it'll be different every time. It
will
can be an adventure every time.
It's so, yeah, just like 2 days ago, I was down at my local park, half a minute down the road, and I saw like a nesting aggregation of native bees. I've never seen those guys nesting before, and I've been, looking around at native bees for quite a long time now. So yeah, like it's so amazing, and I think people really need to like have more of an intimate association with nature rather than like just go travel and see it, like go and observe it, learn to love it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I love spending time in the bush for that reason, and so good for your mental health as well, and physical health. Fresh air, mindfulness, being in the moment, exploring what's around us and connecting with it, because it's all so important and valuable and worth treasuring. So Dr. Kit, you have, as we mentioned, a number of papers, books. You've even come up with a bee bingo card. These products, where can people go? I'll put the links in the description below, but just briefly, where can people go if they're interested in reading your papers or purchasing merchandise?
So my papers, I have them all listed on this site called ResearchGate. So if you just Google Kit Prendergast ResearchGate, you'll be able to find those. But if you want a copy of a paper and you can't access it, just send me an email and I'll send you a free copy of the paper. My email is kitprendergast21@gmail.com. Then the bee art, I'm wearing one of them, and our beautiful model is wearing one too. I've got a range of other designs. You can get them even on face masks because they're super trendy at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they're at my Redbubble store, and my stage name is Bee Babette. And so if you type in Redbubble Bee Babette, that should come up, and you can browse through the different designs there as well.
Excellent. I particularly like this one because, to me, not only is it colourful and it's got a good message, plant these, save the native bees, but I feel like I could just walk into a nursery and say, I'll have 10 of those and 20 of those. Not one and one, but I'll have a bunch of them and a bunch of them so we can have heaps in our garden.
It's definitely the most popular one, and Costa from Gardening Australia has one of those.
Oh, really?
So
excellent.
Keep an eye out on Gardening Australia.
Yeah, okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so chuffed that you joined me. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much for your time, Kit.
Oh, thank you, and I'm glad you were able to experience the beautiful southwest and the drive down and get to see the armadillo around here.
I know. And thank you everybody for watching. I hope you found this video of value. I hope you enjoy watching as much as I've enjoyed interviewing Kit and learning so much about our native bees. To support this channel, please click on the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. My name is Karen Marie. Thanks for joining me in Life in the Bush. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.